Welcome to the channel, Witness for Jesus. This is Dawn. Today I want to share with you an article that I've written, which has taken me quite some time to put together. I've done quite a lot of research. The article has 50 references, that's linked to JW.org and other resources, and in the video description I'm going to put a link where you can find the backup information for this. Now, this is not merely a history lesson. This is something where I've looked at the history of the Two Hopes teaching, but I've looked specifically at the development of it and why it developed, and also considering whether that teaching is scriptural. And it was an eye-opener for me. I learned quite a few things when I was putting this together. I think it's worth the time to have this knowledge, because this kind of knowledge is how we unpick the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses and get a real grasp on where they're really coming from. So let's start. I'm going to start this with a quote from Sun Myung Moon, the leader of the Moonies. He said, "The time has come when the whole world must be concerned about me. From now on, American Christianity must follow me." The Jehovah's Witness organisation has emphasised that the historical roots of a belief or practice is a valuable area of study, and it follows then that an examination of the development of the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses might allow us beneficial insights into the religion today. Joseph Franklin Rutherford, a qualified lawyer and special judge, was elected as the second president of the organisation in 1917. Over 25 years, he transformed the organisation entirely, so much so that thousands of previously faithful Bible students refused to follow him. Rutherford made significant doctrinal changes, not least the teaching that there are two classes of Christians. This article will examine the development of this teaching from a historical standpoint, considering the influences upon Rutherford and whether the justifications for this belief are valid scripturally. Two different, eternally separated destinations for Christians receiving eternal life. There appears to be no record of this teaching in nearly 1,900 years of church history. The Jehovah's Witnesses today maintain that there are two separate hopes for Christians, a heavenly hope and an earthly hope. This is a core teaching of the group, who suggests that the number of humans going to heaven is limited to 144,000, and that an unnumbered group of Christians receiving salvation will be eternally on the earth. In this belief, the JWs are unique. It certainly seems that not one Christian in the early church had ever taught two separate destinations for Christians, nor anyone in subsequent church history. The JW organisation similarly did not teach this for the first 50 years of their existence. What follows is a consideration of the early history of the group, focusing in particular on what influenced the development of current JW doctrine. A prophecy fails. In the early 1920s, Rutherford initiated a campaign backed by his book, "Millions Now Living Will Never Die." The emphatic statement that millions now living will never die referred to the teaching that Armageddon was about to arrive and millions alive would not suffer a physical death, since they would go straight into God's new world. Moreover, the bold assertion was made that the prophet would return from the dead in 1925, coming to live with Rutherford in his luxurious Californian mansion named Beth Sarim. Don't forget, all of the facts in this are referenced, so if you want to find the information, you can look under the video, in the video description. So the JW publication, Proclaimers, wherein the JWs summarise their own history, explains, "We may confidently expect," stated the booklet "Millions Now Living Will Never Die," back in 1920, that 1925 will mark the return from the dead of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob and the faithful prophets of old, to the condition of human perfection. The year 1925 came and went, some abandoned their hope. This was a false prophecy. 100 years later, we can clearly see how misleading this prophecy was. It appears that so did many of the Bible students at the time, since many left the organisation at that point and abandoned Rutherford. And this was a blow for Rutherford's leadership. William Schnell, author and former Jehovah's Witness, claims that 3/4 of the original Bible students who'd been associating with the Watchtower Society in 1921 had left by 1931. In 1930, Rutherford himself stated that the total number of those who have withdrawn from the society is comparatively large. This is unsurprising when one considers that these claims were never presented as opinions or possibilities, but rather the words of God himself. The Watchtower, 1922, July 15th, page 217, claimed, "This chronology is not of man, but of God. The addition of more proofs removes it entirely from the realm of chance into that of proven certainty. The chronology of present truth is not of human origin." Now, Rutherford no doubt carefully considered the reasons for this exodus from the organisation. He would likely note that up until the 1920s, the Bible students resembled mainstream churches in a number of significant ways. Jesus was worshipped, the symbol of the cross was used, and holidays, such as Christmas, were observed. In fact, Zion's Watchtower 1904, December 1st, page 364 said, "We may as well join with the civilised world in celebrating the grand event, Christ's birth, on the day which the majority celebrate, Christmas Day." As such, those leaving the leadership of Rutherford could either follow the Bible students' movement, which continued the teachings of its founder, C.T. Russell, or they may integrate relatively easily into another Christian church. Of significant note is that the movement's founder taught the Bible students that they should be wary of organisation and should be careful to protect their Christian freedom. He said, "Beware of organisation, it's wholly unnecessary. The Bible rules will be the only rules you'll need. Do not seek to bind others' consciences, and do not permit others to bind yours. Believe and obey so far as you can understand God's word today, and so continue growing in grace and knowledge and love day by day." That's the Watchtower, 1895, September 15th. Yet, 40 years after Russell wrote this, it had become possible for the Bible students as an organised movement to have a worldwide influence. In the secular world, Rutherford saw the incredible advances in transportation, which opened up the economy from local or regional sales to worldwide markets. This led to increased product marketing, with brands like Coca-Cola and Kellogg's becoming world dominating from 1900 onwards. For example, in 1931, Coca-Cola paired their drink for the first time with Santa Claus, resulting in incredible profits. Product advertising boomed, with companies the world over developing strategies to make their product unique. Branding, that's labelling your product with a unique name and logo, became extremely important so that consumers knew which product to purchase. Another strategy was to point out the flaws in the product offered by the competition. And this cultural backdrop no doubt influenced Rutherford and his contemporaries in various ways. Rutherford required the right marketing strategy. For Rutherford, it first became essential to identify the Bible students as distinct from the other Christian faiths. So, faced with damaging disloyalty from many of his members, in 1925, Rutherford introduced a radical new concept. There are only two organisations on earth: God's organisation or Satan's organisation. Proclaimers explains. Birth of the Nation, that was the title of a dramatic article appearing in the March 1st, 1925 issue of the Watchtower. It presented an enlightened understanding of Revelation chapter 12 that some found difficult to accept. The symbolic characters mentioned in this chapter of Revelation were identified. On the basis of this, something was clearly explained for the first time. There are two distinct and opposing organisations, Jehovah's and Satan's. Indeed, the really earnest and sincere ones did rejoice over the new explanation. It was now so clear to them. Everyone belongs either to Jehovah's organisation or to Satan's. This was a significant deviation from Russell's teaching and mainstream Christian thought, which is why the above quote states that some found the change difficult to accept. While the teachings of some Christian denominations had already been condemned by the writings of Russell and Rutherford, this was a new and radical claim that the organisation of which Rutherford was currently president is the only organisation on earth which is true and which belongs to Jehovah God. All other organised groups, all other churches, are immediately put into the category of belonging to Satan. A Bible student hearing this information for the first time would no doubt recall that the scriptures say that those putting faith in the Lord Jesus Christ are his body upon the earth, and that his body performs different functions. This biblical teaching facilitated interdenomination acceptance and unity in core faith. Yet now, those who happen to not fellowship with the Bible students group were immediately categorised as following Satan. This demonisation of other churches was at the level of total insult. The Proclaimer's book proudly states, "On Saturday, September 18th, following his morning discourse, Brother Rutherford released the tan-coloured book Enemies. It denounced false religion as a great enemy, always working injury to mankind. False religionists were identified as agents of the devil, whether they are aware of that fact or not. When presenting the book to the audience, Brother Rutherford said, 'You will notice that its cover is tan, and we will tan the old lady's hide with it.' To this the audience gave loud and enthusiastic approval." Note that the footnote clarifies who the old lady is as follows. It's a reference to the great harlot mentioned in Revelation chapter 17. So the message was clear. Only the organisation being led by Rutherford was approved of by Jehovah God, and other churches are an old harlot who will have her hide tanned, a term meaning being punished by beating. Notably, not by Bible truths, but by his own book, entitled Enemies. This attitude has continued until today, with subsequent JW leadership maintaining the teaching that all other Christian denominations are under the control of Satan. Now, having claimed his organisation was the only one approved of by God, Rutherford continued to dig his moat around his ivory tower by condemning celebrations that bring families and denominations together. Whilst the Bible shows that Christians are not to judge each other in regard to celebrations of festivals, as at Colossians 2:14-16 and Romans 14:5-8, the organisation began to impose sanctions upon nearly every social celebration. The Proclaimer's book explains, as the 1920s and then the 1930s progressed, more flashes of Bible understanding followed. Worldly celebrations and holidays such as Christmas were put away. Other practices and beliefs were also discarded when it was seen that they had God-dishonouring roots. It's significant that in 1928 the use of the Christian symbol of the cross was now condemned. The Bible students cherished the cross and crown emblem. Starting in the late 1920s, however, Christ's followers were progressively enlightened regarding the use of the cross. Reflecting on the 1928 assembly held in Detroit, Michigan, USA, Brother Grant Suter, who later served on the governing body, recalled, "At the assembly, the cross and crown emblems were shown to be not only unnecessary but objectionable. Over the next few years, more enlightenment followed. It was clear that the cross has no place in worship that is pure and spiritually clean." In the same year, 1928, Mother's Day, birthdays, and other socially relevant celebrations were disparaged. This move resulted in the members of the organisation being increasingly isolated from their family and friends who were not members, under the guise of maintaining purity. It was certainly no longer easy to leave the Bible students and to integrate into another church. Now a new brand. The name Bible students was insufficiently unique. In 1931, Rutherford announced that the movement was now to be called Jehovah's Witnesses, based on the verses in Isaiah 43, 10 and 11, in which God's words to the nation of Israel are recorded. This certainly gave the organisation a unique, easily identifiable name, despite the fact that it contradicted the command of Jesus that Christians be witnesses of him. Acts 1:8, Acts 4:12, Philippians 2:11. The Tetragrammaton in anglicised form Jehovah now became more prominent than the name of Jesus, and this is reflected today in all JW publications. Rutherford had successfully chosen a unique brand name for the organisation and had effectively created a doctrinal and social chasm between the members of the organisation and mainstream churches. The symbol of the cross and all Christian holidays had been demonised. As the JW publication Proclaimers says of Rutherford's new teaching, indeed the really earnest and sincere ones did rejoice over the new explanation. It was now so clear to them everyone belongs either to Jehovah's organisation or to Satan's. But there was a number dilemma. An important issue had arisen. The elect were said to number 144,000 only. The great company of Revelation was thus far said to be a less faithful class of Christians who would be delivered over to the adversary to suffer and be tested. An important issue had arisen. The elect were said to number 144,000 only. The great company of Revelation was thus far said to be a less faithful class of individuals who would be delivered over to the adversary to suffer and be tested. The Finished Mystery 1918 says, "And I heard the number of them which were sealed. We have every reason to believe that the definite fixed number of the elect is that several times stated in Revelation, namely 144,000 redeemed from amongst men. This is the equivalent of one saint fully developed for each 5 days of the age." The Finished Mystery, page 129. Thus the claim was made that God's elect were 144,000 individuals only. This was to include all Christians from the 1st century down to the 20th century. January 1st, 2016 Watchtower confirms this teaching, suggesting that all others who claim to be Christians were actually false converts. It says, Jehovah began choosing anointed ones, that we know to be the 144,000, after Jesus' death and resurrection, and it seems that all in the 1st century congregation were anointed. From the 1st century until the beginning of the last days, the vast majority of those who claimed to follow Christ were false Christians. Jesus likened them to weeds. And that's Watchtower January 2016 Study Edition. However, historians estimate that by the year 250 AD there were over 1 million Christians. Since these early Christians accepted the basics of Christian doctrines, it seems tenuous to suggest that the majority were false Christians. The JW organisation has simply ignored the evidence put forth by historians on this matter. But Rutherford himself could not deny that there were at least tens of thousands, what he would term true Christians, gathered in the 1st and 2nd centuries, since the Bible account shows 3,000 baptised in one day. Now Rutherford's organisation was growing quickly. 90,434 attended the memorial celebration in 1925. Despite its loss of membership following 1925, the organisation in 1933 reported over 53,000 company workers. Put simply, the organisation was becoming too large to sustain the teaching that it would total 144,000 elect Christians since the 1st century. Now the Two Hopes teaching appears. Rutherford knew a change was needed, which allowed for the organisation membership to grow exponentially. There were two options. Either the number 144,000 had always been symbolic and the organisation had made an error in positing it as literal, or the number was literal and Rutherford needed to explain the growing numbers of faithful JWs. Since the JW organisation has changed teachings in the past, labelling changes as new light, using Proverbs 4:18 as weak justification, it was possible for Rutherford to discard the literal number of 144,000. Yet keeping it would prove to serve a very important purpose. Therefore, Rutherford kept his literal 144,000 elect Christians and simply added another group who were unnumbered and who would have an earthly hope. It's interesting to note that current JW publications admit that the development of the doctrine was influenced by the number of members in the organisation at the time. Revelation, its grand climax at hand, says, their being identified in 1935 as the great crowd of other sheep was an indication that the choosing of the 144,000 was then about complete. And then another quote says, at the time in 1935, attention began to be called to another class of sheep-like disciples of Jesus. The remnant of the little flock now came under the obligation of starting off the gathering of this great crowd of the other sheep. This was because the number of discreet virgins needed to complete Jesus' bride had now been fulfilled. So it's plain that rather than this doctrine appearing after biblical study or revelation from God, the true root was the realisation that the number 144,000 had been reached. What resulted was no doubt a situation of biblical eisegesis, wherein Rutherford and his associates looked for Bible passages to help them explain the situation. They decided that the great crowd would be upon the earth eternally and were unnumbered, thereby allowing for unlimited organisational growth. A consideration of the biblical aspects is to follow, but for now it's simply relevant to say that this change solved Rutherford's number problem. It also offered him something far more important, which would greatly influence the members of the Jehovah's Witness organisation. Now, to the casual observer, this may all seem moot. So they claim there's two destinations for Christians. So what? But this teaching morphed from a simple explanation of how many Christians there are into something which denied millions of people all of the basic Christian blessings and liberties. Rutherford, in one fell swoop, had created an elite group of Christians, his anointed 144,000, whom all other Christians must be associated with. The great crowd with the earthly hope were now reliant upon him and the anointed ones for their very salvation. The anointed class were now described as the faithful and discreet slave whom Jesus appointed over his belongings, a new understanding of the parable of Matthew 24. And if the great crowd class were to have any hope of salvation, they must eat the spiritual food being dispensed by this faithful slave. The Watchtower 2010 March 15th says, although the ever-growing great crowd do not have the heavenly hope, they are proud to be associated with those who do. They have attached themselves to the Israel of God. By doing this, they are included among those whom Jehovah calls my people. The Watchtower 2013 July 15th says, that faithful slave is the channel through which Jesus is feeding his true followers in this time of the end. It is vital that we recognise the faithful slave. Our spiritual health and our relationship with God depend on this channel. The establishment of a priestly class of Christians, few in number, the only elect of God, was the perfect way for Rutherford to secure loyalty. All those who would later become Jehovah's Witnesses from that day to this would be required to acknowledge and obey their priestly leaders, staying loyal to the JW organisation lest their salvation be lost. Moreover, in 2012 the title Faithful and Discreet Slave was narrowed further to refer only to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, thereby securing more power for the leaders of the JW organisation. Watchtower 2014, August 15th, says, "In effect, Jesus also conveys Jehovah's voice to us as he directs the congregation through the faithful and discreet slave. We need to take this guidance and direction seriously, for our everlasting life depends on our obedience." Watchtower 2011, July 15th, says, "But we are acting against Jehovah's purpose if we do not obey the faithful and discreet slave, or if we choose to obey only what we think is important. And if we act against Jehovah's purpose, we cannot be his friends. We need to obey the faithful and discreet slave to have Jehovah's approval." What is more, while previously condemning Roman Catholic excommunication as pagan, carried out by mean and unmanly scallywags, in 1952 the JW organisation introduced the practice of disfellowshipping, and this meant total social ostracism for any member who sinned unrepentantly. This included sins such as celebrating a now forbidden holiday or openly disagreeing with current teaching. Watchtower 1952, March 1st, says, "Those who are acquainted with the situation in the congregation should never say hello or goodbye to him. He is not welcome in our midst. We avoid him. Such an individual has no place in the clean organisation or congregation of God. He should go back to the wicked group that he once came from and die with that wicked group, Satan's organisation." One would imagine that the creation of a second-class group of Christians would be enough to secure loyalty from the rank-and-file JW membership. Yet, astoundingly, the so-called great crowd lost several essential Christian blessings as the years went by. The official teaching of Jehovah's Witnesses today, in 2020, is that the great crowd, also termed other sheep, 1. Are not children of God, are not truly adopted sons of God. 2. Do not have a mediator. 3. Are not part of the new covenant. 4. Are not born again of the Spirit. And 5. Are told that for them to partake of the communion or Eucharist, the bread and wine, is to partake unworthily. Therefore they do not ever partake in communion. All of the above 5 blessings are said to be given only to the 144,000 anointed elite Jehovah's Witnesses. Of particular note is the obscure teaching introduced in the 1950s that Jehovah God is the grandfather of those with an earthly hope, being only father to the anointed, with the organisation being their grandmother. Watchtower 1956, October 1st, page 605 says, "Not only will eternally saved mankind on the paradise earth rejoice evermore, but also the great heavenly husband Jehovah and his faithful beloved wife, the 144,000, his universal organisation in heaven under Jesus Christ. Jehovah as an affectionate grandfather and his universal organisation as tender-hearted grandmother will forever join in expressing their loving kindness to their grandchildren, their God-fearing offspring on earth." This astoundingly unscriptural teaching has not been changed by the JW organisation, as far as I'm aware. Whilst it appears that Jehovah's Witnesses today do not refer to God as their grandfather or the organisation as their grandmother in general speech, it remains nonetheless that God cannot truly be their father. According to official teaching, the majority of JWs are not adopted sons of God. Therefore, the insertion of a mother figure would fit with the requirement of unquestioning loyalty that the organisation demands, even today. Watchtower 2009, February 15th, page 27 says, "Since Jehovah God and Jesus Christ completely trust the faithful and discreet slave, should we not do the same?" Is the Two Hopes teaching biblical? The reality is that the Two Hopes teaching came out of eisegetical desperation and does not match the entire message of the Bible. The core problem is a misinterpretation of John 10 and false linking of John 10, the sheepfolds, with Revelation chapters 7 and 14. Far from offering two eternally separate hopes for Christians, the Bible offers one hope, with no distinction between Christians in terms of salvation and its associated blessings. Ephesians 4:4 says, "There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all." Galatians chapter 3:28 says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." When Jesus spoke of two sheepfolds which would eventually become one, Christians have understood for centuries that this refers to the Jews, a little flock from the Jewish nation who would accept Jesus, Matthew 15:24, Luke 12:32, and the Gentiles, non-Jews, who were welcomed after Jesus' ascension, as described in Acts 10 and Ephesians chapter 2, 11-22. These made one flock with one hope. This one hope is the eventual kingdom of God, described in Revelation chapters 21 and 22 as a new heaven and new earth, wherein the nations, having received a physical resurrection, will dwell with God himself. All Christians are born again of the Spirit, 1 John 5:1, Titus 3:4 and 5, Romans 8:9. All Christians are sons of God and have God as their true Father, John 1:12, Romans 8:13-17, 29 and 30. All Christians are part of the new covenant for forgiveness of sins, Matthew 26:26-28, Jeremiah 31:32-34. Therefore, all Christians have Jesus Christ as their mediator, 1 Timothy 2:5 and 6, Hebrews 9:15. All Christians partake of the bread and wine in communion, since all Christians are redeemed by his body broken and his blood shed for us. Isaiah 53, 1 Peter 2:24, 2 Corinthians 5:21. A more thorough analysis of this teaching from a biblical standpoint, including counter-arguments, will be on this channel in future, but you can see my 3-part video series about the two hopes, which will also be linked below the video. So to conclude, by introducing and elaborating on his two hopes teaching, Rutherford successfully ensured the authority of leadership, loyalty of members and subsequent growth of the JW organisation. Like Sun Myung Moon quoted at the outset, Rutherford ensured that the JWs would follow him. Today, all JW members accept the leadership and spiritual food dished out by the governing body of 8 men, lauding them as God's mouthpiece on earth. Yet for Christians, Jesus is our way, truth and life, our only mediator and Lord. Christian freedom is found in Jesus Christ himself, who by his death and resurrection has offered each human being the opportunity to receive all the abundant blessings promised in the scriptures. Far from there being two separated classes of Christians, all believers are given the honour of entering into the kingdom of God today and have the one true hope of eternal life in the very presence of God. Please share this, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and introduce your friends to it also. God bless.